So I want to start out by saying thank you for joining. I am Molly Keenan. I provide support to Cascadia Innovation Corridor Steering Committee and the great work the subcommittees do in expanding the growth relationships and opportunities across many sectors in Cascadia. We really appreciate you attending today's webinar, Driving Equity Through Innovation Clusters. This is one in a series of webinars hosted by Cascadia Innovation Corridor, and please stay tuned as more webinars are being scheduled and should be announced soon. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This is an hour-long webinar. We will hopefully wrap on time at 12 o'clock Pacific. The chat in the webinar is disabled, but the Q&A function is operational. So please use the Q&A to ask any questions of our panelists. We do have some dedicated time at the end of today's webinar for audience questions, and our moderator, Molly Jones, will do her best to bring the questions to our panelists to be answered live as time and flow of the discussion permits. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Molly Jones. It's my pleasure to introduce her as today's moderator and co-chair of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor's Transformative Tech Subcommittee. Molly is currently the Vice President for Government Affairs at PayActive, a B Corp startup that has pioneered earned wage access to help everyday Americans build financial wellness. She previously served as the Vice President for Government Affairs at the Washington Technology Industry Association and led the association's advocacy and policy work. Prior to WTIA, she was a Vice President at the Asia Group, a strategic and business advisory firm focused on Asia. Molly is a graduate from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service with a BS in Science, Technology, and International Affairs. She received a Master's of Public Policy from Australian National University, where she was a Fulbright and Wexler Scholar. And with that, I will hand it over to Molly.
Thanks, Molly, and everybody is very lucky to have two Mollys with you today. Hopefully you won't be hearing too much from me. I'm just going to be sort of introducing Stephanie and Edo today and facilitating a conversation between the two of them. They're really the people that you want to be hearing from. I will start by introducing them both, and then I'll talk a bit briefly about what a cluster actually is. I imagine for some of you, it's a new concept. For some, maybe you're actively working in clusters, so we're going to try to speak to both of those audiences today. And then we'll proceed into discussions. So please put any questions you have along the way into the chat, and I will either turn to those as we go, or we can save them for the end as well. So starting with introductions, we're very lucky to have Stephanie Scott with us here today. She leads the Department of Commerce's Innovation Cluster Accelerator, which is actually the first statewide cluster development program in the whole United States. So that's a pretty big deal, and we're really lucky to have her. The Department of Commerce is leveraging this industry-led economic development strategy to strengthen Washington's legacy industries, create new sectors, drive innovation and entrepreneurship, and also grow meaningful job opportunities. Stephanie herself is an economic developer with more than 15 years of experience in facilitating community partnerships, tech transfer and commercialization, Department of Defense and federal contracting, and workforce development programs. She's an incredible dot connector, and she helps strengthen the local and regional economy through public and private partnerships. She also has a very international focus, where she serves as the first North American on the board of directors for the TCI Network, which is a global network of clusters and innovation ecosystems across the world, which I imagine we'll hear a bit more about later. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for being here today. Edo, also joining our panel. Thank you, Edo DeMartin. He has over 25 years of experience in software development, focusing on cutting-edge technologies. He formerly held leadership positions at Microsoft, where he grew the Vancouver office and served as a general manager in the Microsoft Dynamics division, where he oversaw the development of Dynamics 365 guides and remote assist in the mixed reality space. Earlier in his career, he was franchise development director at Vancouver's Electronic Arts, and currently he is the CEO and co-founder of Industrial AI, which is a company that specializes in the design and building of scalable software and data solutions for businesses. Edo, your accomplishments are a bit of a mouthful. He uses his expertise to support organizations that are shaping the Canadian tech ecosystem, like the Canadian Digital Global Innovation Supercluster that we'll be talking about today. And he also sits on the boards of Innovate BC, the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, and the Richmond Hospital Foundation. So thank you, Edo, for being here today as well. I'm about to jump into some questions with these two, but first, perhaps to set the stage a little bit on what even is an innovation cluster. It is a relatively new and maybe even a little bit niche. Edo and Stephanie might correct me on that, but economic development model that leverages an industry-led consortium that will then drive innovation, pursue market opportunities, and identify and solve challenges that limit growth. And significantly within the cluster model, it brings together these sort of 5 pillars of industry leaders and corporates, entrepreneurs and startups, government, academia, and investors. And that's sort of really the unique approach of the cluster model, but I will leave it to them to talk to you more about that. So thank you all so much for being here. Again, please put any questions in the chat. So to start off, I'm going to turn to both Stephanie and Edo. It'd be great if you could each give us some background on your role in leading innovation clusters, both here in Washington, as well as British Columbia and Canada more broadly. So maybe Stephanie, if you want to start there.
Sure. And first of all, thank you to the Cascadia Innovation Corridor for having us today, to the Mollys and Rebecca, and to all of you who are joining us. I lead, as Molly mentioned, the first statewide cluster development program, which is here in Washington State. And what that means is we're helping build innovation clusters. So right now we're supporting 9 innovation clusters through a combination of funding and a cluster development program. Because although innovation clusters, this model has been widely used across the world, particularly in Europe, for 10 to 20 years or more, it's relatively new here in the United States. And so we are actually supporting startup innovation clusters, I guess is a way to think about it, folks that are just getting off the ground and building their innovation clusters with funding, but also technical assistance and strategic guidance to help them build this, because it requires a level of collaboration that just doesn't naturally happen across many of our ecosystems. And I'll talk a little bit more when I jump into my slides here in a few minutes about what we're doing here in Washington State.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. Edo, could you give us a bit of an overview about your role and engagement in clusters?
Yeah, thank you. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I join you from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, which includes Squamish, Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Yeah, so my involvement in the supercluster has actually been quite some time. Initially, when I worked at Microsoft and I was the GM of our development, the Microsoft Development Center in Vancouver, I sort of led, our involvement in the supercluster when it initially started, and Microsoft was one of the key funders in the Canadian Digital Supercluster, one of the enterprises, and I served as board chair for the first couple of years as we kicked that program off. And then as I left Microsoft and my life turned different directions, I came back to the supercluster as part of my consultation work as a chief development officer. And my goal right now with the supercluster is really threefold. One is to kind of bring in new private investment into the cluster. I think Stephanie touched a little bit on that, and you as well on how it's industry led, and we it's a combination of private and public money. Second thing that I really do is sort of add sort of a lens of the private sector to the organization, so that we're both serving our government partners, but we're also serving our partners in the community. And then sort of the third piece, I add sort of as you could tell from my bio, I'm kind of a technical nerd that sort of got into this, and so I add my nerdness on sort of the what we invest in technology. I'm sort of another voice or advocate for certain technologies that make sense for Canada and our region.
Awesome. Thanks, Edo. Yeah, great to have that expertise at the table. So it'd be great, the focus of this discussion here today is how clusters can help drive equity. So I think it would be great to start there. How do you both see the ways that innovation clusters can help drive equity amongst the population, or as it relates to the adoption of technology?
Edo, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Sure. Well, one of the things that in the sort of the creation of digital innovation cluster, what we kind of balanced our programs around two kind of key areas. One is sort of the advancement of technology. So building an ecosystem around, a particular technology, an SME, a startup around a tech that can, benefit or solve one of our bigger problems. So we're really a demand-driven sort of organization. That's one function. So we're helping entrepreneurs and small to medium-sized Canadian companies scale their business. The second thing that we realize as we're building and scaling, we need to develop an ecosystem, and talent is such a huge part of that ecosystem. And so we, part of our organization, we have a function called a digital learning lab. And what our digital learning lab's goal is really to kind of bring programs and reskilling and technologies education to the underserved communities. And we have a couple of programs in place. One of them is called the Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator, where we're partnered with Microsoft, Blueprint, and Empower. And we're basically addressing sort of the underserved communities by bringing together the programs that help them get jobs. And our previous programs, we had an 80% placement rate, and we put out about 7,000 jobs across Canada that moved people that didn't have sort of the education that, perhaps you don't have access to. We've been able to get them sort of to leapfrog into these technical roles, and which we're really proud of. And so the way we look at it is having both those two functions hand in hand builds an ecosystem that feeds each other.
I would just add to that, thinking about how an innovation cluster helps drive equity, specifically in the adoption of technologies. One of the most important things that I see clusters both having an impact and having great potential for additional impact is the way that they bring stakeholders together by design. So the innovation cluster model provides a framework to involve everybody from tribes to labor unions to organizations and communities that serve historically marginalized groups, to create work groups that can facilitate projects to explore potential inequities in adoption. So everything from looking at inequitable access to technology, to emerging technologies, to exploring potential for things like racial bias in technologies like AI. And so, in my role, growing innovation clusters, our current 9, and thinking about future innovation clusters, it's really thinking about using this model to get the right people involved with industry in ways that perhaps we haven't had opportunities to in the past.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you both for that. I know you both have some slides to cover as well, so we can dig into that a little bit more deeply. Whoever wants to present first, please go for it.
I can jump in here 1 second. Give me 1 second to situate myself here. Are you all seeing my presentation slides?
Yeah.
Perfect. So as mentioned, I lead a cluster development program here in Washington State. And the question I get a lot of times is, why are we investing in innovation clusters? And so, as we think about the changing global economy, we know that we need to create high value jobs, and along with that, upskill our workforce and attract the talent to meet that demand. And as we do that, we need to think about building the diverse and equitable workforce of the future. We also need capital to develop these high growth, high value industries, and we need to make sure that there's equitable access to that capital. And then be thinking about how we can support our sectors through these innovation clusters in capturing global market opportunities to increase exports. And so as we're doing that, it's thinking about how are we involving and benefiting BIPOC-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, LGBTQIA+ owned businesses in those efforts through our innovation clusters. So and then in addition to that, as we look at the priorities of the Biden administration, as demonstrated by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act and the CHIPS and Science Act, we really see an opportunity to secure our place as a state in the global race for the clean energy economy that touches nearly all of our key sectors here in Washington State. And innovation clusters are really one of the key ways that we're looking to do that. In fact, through supportive innovation clusters, we recently secured, we're in the award process for a Department of Energy hydrogen hub, and we also received a designation as a regional tech hub through the EDA program as well. So really seeing the impacts of this model. An innovation cluster, just real briefly, I was talking when we answered the first question about bringing together stakeholders. And just a brief synopsis here, an innovation cluster is a formalized, industry-led, typically membership-based organization that's working together to do those things you see on the screen. But it's really about creating that table that brings together all of the different stakeholder groups within that sector to come together to identify and solve challenges that limit industry growth, pursue market opportunities, and also drive innovation. So really about providing that platform to everyone to come together and work together. I won't touch on this too much, but as we get into this deeper conversation about how clusters can drive equity, a cluster's project portfolio is really where the magic happens. So clusters will create typically work groups that are leading projects to do everything from solve industry challenges. So maybe they're creating training programs or building accelerators. Maybe they have work groups that are focused on joint innovation projects, and perhaps work groups that are focused on international market development. And so these are really a place where we can think about who is involved in these work groups, what voices are missing to help us use these projects, these cluster projects, to drive equity. Just real briefly, our Innovation Cluster Accelerator here at Commerce, we are building clusters. We work with a variety of organizations in our first cohort, and we actually have an application live for our second cohort. So these are the organizations, and I apologize, I don't know why these are so blurry today, but these are the 9 innovation clusters that we are currently supporting through our program through a combination of funding and actual strategic guidance and technical assistance. We worked with an international cluster subject matter expert, Christian Rangan, to develop curriculum, and we're actually working with them all quarterly. We also bring them together as a cohort to learn with and from each other, which has had the really great benefit of creating cross-sector relationships, creating some opportunities for some collaboration across our sectors, which is really valuable, particularly when we think about some of our clean tech clusters and our information communications technology clusters, working with some of our manufacturing clusters, for example, to think about clean tech adoption and Industry 4.0. I'm going to kind of fly through this, but we really do see an opportunity to use our clusters to center diversity, equity, and inclusion, to pursue federal opportunities. We have historic federal investments here in the United States right now, build those cross-sector partnerships that I've mentioned, strengthen partnerships with industry and academic and research institution partners, and really drive small business creation and growth, and do all of these things with really a focus on equity and inclusion. So I'll hand it over to Edo now, and then looking forward to the follow-up conversation.
Thank you, Stephanie. And as Edo's getting set up here, folks, please put any questions in the Q&A box in the chat. I know I had a lot that came up from Stephanie as she was going through that as well. Please feel free to put any in there. Go ahead, Edo.
Thanks. Actually watching, Stephanie's presentation and the chats we've had before, and we've worked with Chris Rangan as well. It's a really small community, actually, in the supercluster community around the world. So I'll share a little bit, and there's lots of similarities from what Molly described and Stephanie's slides. So I'm going to bolt through here. So our goal at Digital is to unlock the potential of Canadians and Canadian enterprises to lead and succeed in the digital world. We have about 1,200 organizations that are part of our membership. They range anywhere from industry, startup, SMEs, anchor multinationals, research organizations, public sector, and community not-for-profit. And so, as we saw in Stephanie's slide, very similar sort of model. What we do is we build a model through what we call collaborative innovation, and so we bring the best team together to accelerate a bold solution to our society's greatest problems. And so, that circle there kind of is most of our projects are consortium that is made up of all these sort of areas, because we feel that with technology, and I think when we think about clusters, why are these things, all of a sudden becoming a big deal? It's because a lot of technology just cannot be created in a silo. To have societal impact, you need to collaborate and work together. And we can see that our organizations are pushing other organizations together and sort of forcing them, gently coaxing them into collaborating toward, a potential innovative outcome. And so, there's kind of three main things that I think are sort of something to think about when you think about our cluster. We're really demand-based research and development, and I would say later stage research and development. And what we sort of focus more on the not sort of seed round, but sort of the next round when you're ready to scale. And so what we see our program as helping you get over that hump. And then we accelerate development through co-investment. So every public $1, it's $1.05 industry. And so, industry has got to put some skin in the game. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful. And then the third piece, which, we've been around, I think it's our fifth or sixth year now. And what in our first year, we learned from some of our mistakes. And one of the things we added is a customer to the whole equation. So we're driving this. So we have the demand side of things. There's a need for it, and then we bring the customer to the consortium now, and so that we have someone who consumes the product and the innovation as it evolves out. And some of our partners have been, customers like Tech Resources, Lululemon, large organizations, global organizations from sort of the Canadian backdrop. Those are sort of the key elements of our innovation collaboration model. We're focused on health, access to health and patient outcomes. We're focusing on addressing some impacts of climate change. So we have, health for our citizens and the environment for our citizens. And then we're really helping drive productivity and growth and the competitiveness in the Canadian industry by helping those Canadian companies get into that sort of scale mode. And then finally, I talked a little bit about it earlier, supporting the workforce as we're developing the ecosystem, making sure our folks are up to speed and working in this, no one is left behind in this digital economy. Some of the numbers that, we've been around that sort of accumulated, I won't go through all of them, but I think one of them is really interesting, is really 458 total IP generated to date. So through our programs, really help people's focus and companies focus on their IP strategy, so that one of the outputs when they exit, our program is, they have an IP that they can fall back on. 828 million in knockoff funding for our SMEs. This is really, interesting, because what's happening is they're coming through our programs, then they're going and they're getting more funding because, they're in that next round. So we kind of see us kind of setting up those Canadian companies for that next round. And then a couple of examples. I talked a little bit about this at the opening, a Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator, where really it's a program that is really servicing the underserved in our communities. And it's really about no one gets left behind in a digital revolution. The solution really comes from a collaboration of Empower Canada, Microsoft Canada, and Blueprint. They're working together to build this sort of a curriculum for the underrepresented. And so I think I talked for already, I won't repeat it. We have that 7,000 placements, which is, pretty cool. And we're focused on data analytics and visualization, IT service management, and AI. And then one of our, through our tech leadership program, one of our companies just recently, and this is the neat stuff you get to do in these clusters, where we built a consortium around a need, antimicrobial resistance, AMR, obviously coming out of COVID, this is a concern. And so, a company just down the street, 12 individuals had a solution, an application that we went through our program, and we actually helped them get adopted. They're called First Line by the World Health Organization and deployed to 106 countries around the world, and the second largest adoption of Canadian health technology in history. So that's the kind of output that potential that we have with these innovation clusters. And I believe that's my last slide.
Great, thank you both. That's a really helpful overview to sort of drill down into what each of your sort of cluster lenses are doing and working on. And I talked a bit about equity at the beginning and in your slides. I'm going to kind of drill down on some of those questions a little bit further. One thing when we think about clusters and equity is sort of the small business space and the workforce space. So each or both of you, if you can talk about how we can leverage these clusters to drive equity in the workforce and small business.
I can start. I think on the small business side of things, what's really interesting, I think as technology, emerges, a lot of the larger entities are, dominating the success of the output of new technologies. And what the cluster has the opportunity to do is help that entrepreneur, that small organization, step across that divide to actually be competitive in that. And often in technology, what generally happens is, the larger companies are building a lot of the platform technology, a lot of the broader tech that the smaller companies build on top. So what we found is to bring those organizations together, and instead of trying to beat each other, why don't we work together using platforms from these companies and then building these new organizations on top of that are profitable and succeeding over that. The other piece of it is, again, as like I mentioned before, it's really about bringing the you have a population that has access to education, that has the privilege to have that. Not everybody has that. And so what we try to target in our programs are the folks that don't have that ability to get to that education. And so what our programs are doing is lifting that part of the economy up so that we have a much more even distribution of understanding and the ability to work within the technology economy.
Great, thanks, Edo. Can I ask a bit of a follow-up question on that, sort of building on one from the chat? You mentioned how startups can help facilitate investment. Can you drill down into maybe an example of how that has worked in the cluster, or sort of a success story there?
Is that me or Stephanie? Or?
Yeah, you.
Sorry. So the question is, how does
drilling down into the specifically how the cluster would facilitate that investment in startups, or what that looks like for folks not involved in that.
Yeah. So for example, one organization we've worked with recently that won the Governor General's Award is called IDEON. They have a technology that helps. It's basically building an X-ray of the Earth, so that you can locate certain deposits of minerals, so that you drill once instead of 18 times to find that one pocket. So benefiting our climate, our economy, et cetera, et cetera. So what we do is the need there is to obviously get minerals, but do it in a way that doesn't damage our environment. So we build a consortium around IDEON, and basically bringing in the larger mining companies that would, as customers, bringing in UBC as the sort of research arm partner in there, and then a few other smaller companies or SMEs that support the sort of ancillary technologies to get to the end result. Building the POC is really the output of that, and then IDEON takes that POC and starts to bring that to market. And so that's an example, a very quick example of how we organize ourselves in the benefit of society, in the benefit of solving this problem, and in the benefit of the entrepreneur.
Great, thanks, Edo. And Stephanie, anything to add from your perspective on the small business and workforce piece centering equity?
Yeah, so just kind of going back to what I talked about with the projects, those work groups that innovation clusters lead. They really depend on what the overall strategy of the specific innovation cluster is. So, depending on what a cluster identifies industry needs, industry is involved in setting that plan of what types of projects they need to do. But oftentimes that's developing worker training programs, focused on small business and startup support. So often some of our innovation clusters are building accelerators and incubators, investment funds, or supporting market development efforts for the small business and startup community. And so really looking to design those programs to take into consideration the unique challenges and needs of BIPOC and women-owned businesses. So that can be things like, solving challenges like access to capital. And a great example, here in Washington State, we've had some work around Sharia compliant investing. And so really making sure that you understand the needs as an innovation cluster of the small business community within the sector you represent. So a really great example of that, one of our innovation clusters here is led by the Washington Technology Industry Association, WTIA. They lead our innovation cluster that's focused on blockchain and quantum computing. And overall, WTIA is an organization that I have a great deal of respect for the way that they center equity. And they are leveraging the US EDA Good Jobs Challenge grants to develop the tech workforce with a focus on historically marginalized communities through their apprentice program. And that's, works very closely with their innovation cluster. And they're leveraging partners like Boeing and Amazon Web Services, to diversify the tech workforce. They started in Washington State, but they're scaling it nationwide with support from the EDA, and just looking for more opportunities for our, early stage cluster development program that we have right now to support additional work like that. And so for folks that are with us today that, things like that sound interesting, there's opportunities to connect with our current innovation clusters to learn about projects or even share some of the challenges that you're facing. With your own small business or, workforce needs to help influence, the work ahead with some of those innovation groups or even to get involved and engaged with them.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I think building on something that you mentioned there, I'm curious about clusters you mentioned, Edo, yours that you mentioned as well. Cascadia is interested in building connectivity across, it finally happened, across the region or the mega region between, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And I'm curious if, from your perspectives, what you see as the potential for clusters in Washington, clusters in British Columbia, and Canada more broadly to work together.
I mean, I think there's a lot of, potential. I think the challenge obviously is, we're two different nations. So there's rules around how we access our money within our borders, but that doesn't mean that we can't benefit from the work that we're doing in the region. And I think one of the powerful things of Cascadia, is that, we often say here in the West Coast that we're more connected to folks in Washington State than we are to the East Coast of Canada, because we have the same weather, we talk the same, we sort of have the same makeup of kind of the companies, really strong software, industry. So I think there's potential there for sure. I think one of the things Stephanie and I talked about is, we've never been down to visit Stephanie and vice versa. So I think the first step is for us to get together. And I think the second step is really about how, just a thought I had was, how do we help our sort of graduating companies and clusters? How do we help them potentially find markets in globally in our own regions, or how could their technologies benefit by working together? And I think, we haven't explored those, but that would be super interesting to explore, because I'm pretty sure we'd find some connections there.
I would add to that. So, we've talked about innovation clusters being new. It's relatively new in North America, but around much of the world, they've been relying on this economic development model for a long time. And so I think we're still figuring this out. But what I've seen so far really gives me a lot of hope for the promise of collaboration across the border. Because we're already seeing a lot of opportunity with some of our partners around the world that have been doing this longer than we have. So some of our innovation clusters are partnering with innovation clusters in Norway and Finland and France. And I really see this model as being a driver of international collaboration, because it allows us to speak the same language. We're building the same types of organizations, bringing together the same types of ecosystem partners. And so I think that, as we look to the Canadian program continuing to grow, and our program here in Washington State, and then, the federal government here in the US also starting to adopt this model through programs like NSF Engines and EDI Regional Tech Hub, we either learn how to partner together and do some really awesome work together, or we're going to fall behind. And so I think it's a challenge to all of this. It's not, can we do this? It's, how are we going to do it, and how are we going to do it tomorrow?
Yeah, that's great. I agree with that. I think Cascadia hopefully is a good platform to help build some of that connectivity. Cascadia is almost like a mini cluster in and of itself. We do have kind of participants from all 5 of those pillars without the sort of formal economic development. Well, I guess we do have that mandate as well. And we have, this is a technology committee. We've got committees focused on other topics like transportation, climate change, et cetera. I've got one more question on my mind, and I see there's some great questions in the chat. So I'll ask my last question, and then we can turn to audience questions. So please feel free to put those there. I want to drill down into this thing we are talking about sometimes or several times of industry-led. What does that mean? What does that look like? And how do you both kind of facilitate that in being successful? Like what are the keys there for success?
Yeah, I can jump in first. So when we think about traditional economic development, specifically in the United States, oftentimes it's kind of, if we build it, industry will come. And this model really flips that. And it's all about industry playing a driving role in creating the cluster strategy, in actively engaging in order to make sure that the challenges we're solving as a cluster and the opportunities that we're pursuing are actually what industry needs. And rather than building something and thinking it's great and then finding that, oh, that's not actually what industry wants, and we need to go back to the drawing board. And so it's what we see, the successful model around the world is that senior industry leadership is on the board. The board chair is typically a C-suite rep from industry, and that you've got active engagement from companies of all sizes, and really helping define what industry-wide challenges are impacting industry growth, where there are opportunities both in R&D and in market development, and really actively engaging those industry members in the projects that the cluster is working on, and building those relationships with the other industry ecosystem partners, whether it's workforce development partners, academic and research partners, investors, your governmental partners, your tribes, and ethnic chambers of commerce when we're thinking about the small business community. Making sure that you're providing opportunities for connection within the cluster that are really centered on industry.
Yeah, I mean, building on that, I think there's kind of like 3 things that really kind of, really attract industry and help make an industry led. I think one is, the participation of the cluster and the funding from the cluster, really de-risks the overall investment in the solution. And so that's number one. That's attractive to industry, and that's attractive to everyone participating in that. So we kind of see that our cluster is a catalyst to bring groups together. The second piece is bringing the groups together. Like what we've noticed is like a lot of these people would have not have worked together, and their coming together is unnatural in some ways. And so what we've found as an organization is that we bring that together. And, I remember when we started the cluster at the very beginning, when it was just like an idea, it was sort of like, this is never going to work. And I was one of those from industry saying, hey, well, is this really going to work? And then more and more you started to see, well, yeah, it does make sense. This does make sense, but why doesn't it happen naturally? And so what we're really doing is accelerating that bringing together of people. And then I think the third piece is really, of having a demand, like a real problem that people want to solve, and then having a real customer on the other side. And then once you can stitch those things together, then you have, this all makes sense. And I think for industry, you need demand and you need a customer, right? And then you have the de-risking. And so now industry, you put skin in the game, and they'll come to play because it makes a lot of sense, because it speaks the language of business. And I think that's where these can be successful.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Every time you guys talk about clusters, it gets me so excited about them. It's, and it's interesting to think that, they're so far along and doing so well, but also some of those early stages, requires a lot of work to facilitate those connections. Going to turn now to the audience Q&A. We have a lot of great questions here in the chat. I'm going to start with one from Hillary. How do you define equity and set goals around it with your partners? We have found that representation at all levels is key. Access and diversity in decision-making is even more important. Curious how you approach this.
Well, I mean, that's pretty project specific. And I'll answer it with one of our, generally when we start out the sort of the demand side of the equation, whether it's a product or whether it's, capacity building, what we're looking at the research that's helping defining and understanding where the underserved communities are and what's lacking. And we have a program called Digital Lift, led by BC Tech, the Washington State version. I forget the acronym, Stephanie. WTIA, is that?
Yes.
Yeah. The sort of the BC version. We're there basically going out and they're identifying the needs first and then building the program around that, rather than just assuming, let's just go here because, I heard this, right? There's a lot of research that goes out first in forming the program. So we start from that angle, then we build the program, and then we set the goals based on our research, and which is really around the high. Obviously, you want to get 100% placement and everything. We've got anywhere from 80 to 90 on the programs that we've put out on the job, which I think is pretty good. But there's always room to, how do you get that other 10% there, or the other 20%? So we're always going back, refocusing, figuring out and perfecting, how we do that.
I would add to that. So here in Washington State, with the program that I lead, we're supporting organizations that are building innovation clusters, and we're using a combination of federal and state funds to do that. And so, in addition to what we as a state agency are trying to drive in terms of equitable economic development, we also have to answer to our legislature and our federal funding partners like the EDA. That hold us to reporting on the work that we do in terms of equity. And so, we're still in the first couple of years of building our innovation clusters as they're building their boards of directors. To your point, Hillary, about representation, challenging our innovation clusters to think about how they're building diverse boards. And making sure that their innovation groups include representation from whether it's individuals or organizations that can represent, BIPOC owned businesses, or thinking about equitable workforce development, making sure that we have the right people at the table. And then when we're looking at cluster projects, our program doesn't fund projects. But when they're looking at projects that they're doing, one of the things that I really appreciate about many of the funding mechanisms is that they're actually requiring innovation clusters and other organizations to spell out how the programs that they're building are aligned with and partnering with tribes, as we saw with EDA regional tech hubs. But what I'm seeing from our innovation clusters here in Washington State is really efforts that aren't driven by reporting requirements or grant application requests, but really true collaboration and partnership, and looking to expand on that. So what I would say to those of you who represent historically marginalized communities, if you're interested in partnering with our clusters in Washington State, please reach out to me so that I can help connect you, because many of our folks are still in the early stages of building their boards and building their project portfolios. And it's really that excellent time to get involved in helping shape that with our early stage innovation clusters that we have here in Washington State.
That's great. Thanks, Stephanie. And we're going to have a slide at the end with contact information to that end. So Stephanie mentioned, being at the table, and we've got a great question on that in the chat. Edo, this one is specifically for you. It's from Joseph Nash, who is excited to see you speak here, which is nice. Edo, do you see a way that First Nations and British Columbia can attend the table directly, bypassing the middleman, so that First Nations, of which there are 203, can have direct access to the table or the digital supercluster, so that we can help each other close the digital divide? And a note there that the ISC does not currently directly fund digital readiness.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer that and then say, Joseph, follow up with me after. I would love to speak with you. I think there's a couple things. We have a program called Coastal First Nations Connectivity, the CFNC network project, which we're training community leaders to enable rural community access and sort of to broadband and other connectivity challenges that we have in remote communities. We also have an Indigenous digital health ecosystem project that we're kicking off. We have kicked off, and Sean McCumbert, who is Indigenous health advisor, is on our board, and so we have some programs in play that are addressing that. It looks like not specifically British Columbia, which I find interesting. So I'd love to. We have the capability. So short answer, we have the capabilities to do this within British Columbia, absolutely. So I'd love to connect with Joseph after. So we'll share the contact information after, and we can connect for sure.
Great, thanks, Edo.
That was a Canada specific question, but if I could just add, most of our innovation clusters in Washington are really in that project development phase right now, and are wanting to make sure that they're strategically connecting with tribes that are either in their communities or interested in the sectors that they're representing, whether it be for workforce development or tribal business engagement, or concerns about technologies. And so, they're really making an effort to try to get tribal engagement early on. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to me so I can make connections to the relevant innovation clusters here in Washington, so that we can make sure that those voices are included at the strategic level.
Another question here in the chat from Janet Slotnick. Super interesting. Could you describe the needs each of you see for workforce development in your jurisdictions? And I might add to that workforce development and potentially any equity overlaps there. Also, any tips for what post-secondary institutions can do to be more effective in supporting this work? So what are the workforce development needs, and how can post-secondary institutions help?
I can start off. Okay. One of the needs right now with this sort of AI hype and actual boom is the understanding of using data and how to use data analytics, data science. Is super important, because we talk a lot about AI. AI can't happen if it doesn't have data, and AI also can't happen if it isn't organized data, and people need to understand how to read data, how to use data in their business. That's a massive opportunity for education right now, and that's very topical. I think the other thing too is critical thought and thinking. Creative technology is a very creative field, and it's important for, I'll kind of go into the secondary school kind of thing. Like, a lot of programs are saying, well, hey, let's get rid of anything creative and let's just all do coding and science. We should do all of it, because we need to develop critical thinkers that participate in society, and we need them to be creative, because technology and innovation comes from the use of creative solutions. Whether you're using AI, whether you're using blockchain, whether you're using whatever, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're creative with these solutions and have an understanding and a foundation in it. So I would say that what I would look to on the secondary schools is much more emphasis on learning the things that are going to be impactful in the business community today. And creativity is a great driver of innovation. It's really the key center of innovation. I think it's super important. And of course, as I talked about, data management, data understanding is super important right now.
I'll take a little more tactical approach to answering this in terms of really seeing a need for technical and training programs outside of four-year degree programs, and whether it's incumbent worker training or students coming out of high school or non-traditional career fields, really needing to make sure that we're reaching populations that either don't have access to four-year degree programs, or in some cases even 2-year community college programs, but could benefit from other forms of technical training. And the other piece, thinking about post-secondary partnership within innovation clusters, I think that the innovation clusters really provide a phenomenal opportunity for our post-secondary partners to access industry in an easy, meaningful way. Getting involved with innovation clusters, whether in Canada, in Washington State, throughout the US, throughout the world, it can be a really meaningful way to quickly access industry input to help inform the curriculum that you're developing, the creation of new programs, so that you make sure that the students that are coming out of your programs are as ready as they possibly can be for the job opportunities that industry will have for them. And interestingly enough, with that, one of the challenges that we have in Washington State, we have some really phenomenal post-secondary institutions, and then we don't always have the jobs here in Washington State for those graduating students to enter into. And so the innovation cluster model also really provides a good opportunity to work with the sector as a whole to make sure that we're growing jobs for those graduates. And so I think that there's just a really phenomenal way for our post-secondary institutions to work very collaboratively with our innovation clusters across sectors.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question here before we close. I know you both have kind of alluded to it, but I'd like to drill down into it more specifically. And thank you, Jaren, for raising that in the chat. But what are the suggestions that you would have for various groups, be it any of the 5 pillars, getting involved with innovation clusters in Washington or British Columbia?
So in Washington State, you can visit icapwashington.org. There's a clusters tab to learn about the 9 innovation clusters that we currently support, which do include an advanced technology cluster focused on blockchain and quantum computing, an edge computing and 5G innovation cluster, and then various other clean tech and manufacturing and marine autonomous clusters. And so if you do find a cluster there that you're interested in, you can access their websites and reach out directly. Or please feel free to contact me. My contact information will be shared at the end. I'm more than happy to do a warm intro after the webinar today to connect you with them, to explore opportunities, to get involved, to work on projects, to propose projects. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our second cohort application live now on the Washington State Department of Commerce website, contracting opportunities page. And we would welcome if there are additional consortia here in Washington State that might be interested in leading a future innovation cluster. Please be sure to check that out.
Great. And then if your folks are interested in the digital innovation cluster, it's digitalsupercluster.ca. All our programs are listed there on how you can get involved. Right now, we have a program called Horizon AI, which is the goal of Horizon is to commercialize AI in Canada. We have a tremendous amount of talent in AI coming out of our universities. And what we really building a program that's helping us move to commercialization of these solutions. So if you're in that camp, apply for a Horizon AI. We also have an open call on the technology leadership program, for solutions in healthcare, solutions in environmental in climate change. And so all those are open currently. So we're actively taking in calls and building those consortiums and programs right now. So yeah, please just go ahead. And then also just reach out to me. If I point here, can people see this? Eduardo.demartin@digitalsupercluster.com. There you go. .ca, sorry.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much to the audience for attending this webinar. It looks like the screen share here is coming up now with the contact info we've been discussing. The Cascadia website is also connectcascadia.com. Are people able to see the screen, or maybe I'm not? Okay.
No.
It says you've started sharing, but it's just a black screen.
Molly K, we're not quite able to see that screen yet.
Chiming in to say, oh, sorry, Paul.
While our audience is waiting with bated breath, thank you so much, Edo and Stephanie, for your time today and sharing your expertise. Really appreciate it. We can also we'll try to share the screen here for folks who want to stick around, but I think we might have a frozen computer here in the background. But we can also follow up to the folks who registered with that contact information we discussed over email, I hope. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And look forward to kind of leveraging the Cascadia platform to continue to build connections across different industries and sectors, including in the technology and cluster space.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much,
Stephanie,
Edo.
good to see you again.
Thank you. Great to see you. And thanks to all who joined us today. If you didn't get your question answered and it's an answer you want from Washington State, please feel free to reach out to me.
And I'll take Canadians.
Great. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.